Okay. Hi, everybody. Just started the webinar. Seeing attendees are starting to trickle in, so we'll wait a moment. Please note that we do have Spanish and English slides. So there should, on your toolbar, you should be able to see an option to select either Spanish or English slides, so please do so. We've also included that in the chat box for directions if you have any issues with that.
Buenas tardes a todos. Estamos viendo que comienzan a llegar diferentes asistentes. Vamos a esperar un poquito para darles más tiempo a que ya estén todos presentes. Como pueden ver, tenemos diapositivas tanto en inglés como en español. En la parte superior de la pantalla de Zoom pueden ver donde dice diapositivas en español. Si necesitan o quieren verlas en español, por favor, hagan clic allí. Y también hemos incluido las instrucciones en el chat. Gracias. Uy.
It's been a couple minutes. Yeah,
Yeah,
get going.
the attendees has slowed down, so I think we're going to get started now.
Bien, las personas que están ingresando ya lo están haciendo a menor velocidad, así que vamos a comenzar.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am Austin Hicks from the California Air Resource Board and the lead staff on the 2025 Mobile Source Strategy, or 2025 MSS. Thank you all for tuning in today for our second webinar. This second webinar is an opportunity to learn about the numerous categories of vehicles and equipment along with the building blocks of scenario development. We will provide a summary of each category's emissions, current control programs, and available technologies and emission reduction potential. We will also discuss future public engagement opportunities, timing, and next steps. Please note that these slides are available in both English and Spanish on our website at www.arb.ca.gov/resources/documents/2025-mobile-source-strategy. If you go to CARB's homepage and use the search function to search 2025 Mobile Source Strategy, or even type CARB 2025 Mobile Source Strategy into Google or another search engine, you should be able to find it. I will now pause for Spanish interpretation.
Tardes, especialista en contaminación del aire y soy el miembro del personal que lleva el liderazgo en cuanto a este esfuerzo. Este es nuestro segundo webinario que estamos llevando a cabo sobre la estrategia 2025 de fuentes móviles. Vamos a estar hablando de las diferentes categorías de vehículos y equipo, el desarrollo que hemos llevado a cabo hasta ahorita, los programas que deseamos sobre los que deseamos informarles, también el control de diferentes tecnologías, de diferentes foros donde se está estudiando y también vamos a tener información sobre los pasos que siguen a futuro, y si desean obtener más información al respecto, por favor acuda a nuestro portal, que es el arb.ca.gov y luego diagonal, y el programa mismo ahí les va a aparecer. Gracias.
We are offering Spanish interpretation for the webinar today, but this is only available if you are participating through the Zoom application. We'll be activating this momentarily, and once we do, everyone participating on Zoom will need to click the word interpretation with the globe found at the bottom at the Zoom window and select the language you would like to hear, English or Spanish. Even if you will continue to listen in English, you must make that selection in Zoom. Without selecting a language, you will hear no audio during the webinar. To hear only Spanish, please click Mute Original Audio. Please email us at mss@arb.ca.gov if you have any difficulties. I'm now going to have the interpreter walk through this in Spanish, and then we will have simultaneous interpretation for the rest of the webinar.
Vamos a tener interpretación simultánea al español y para eso las personas que nos están escuchando en la aplicación de Zoom necesitan escoger interpretation, ya sea a través del globo terráqueo o los puntos suspensivos. Y es necesario que seleccionen un idioma, ya sea inglés o español. Si no seleccionan un idioma, entonces no van a escuchar el audio. En la pantalla aparecen las instrucciones para poder acceder a esto. Perdón, si están teniendo dificultades técnicas, pueden enviar un correo electrónico a mss@arb.ca.gov. Gracias.
To do it myself, to make sure I'm in it. Okay. Thank you. As part of today's Spanish interpretation, we are also including the presentation in Spanish. To view this, click View Options to the right of the green bar located at the top of the Zoom webinar window. After clicking View Options, select Dispositivas en Español or Austin Hicks English Slides. Please email us at mss@arb.ca.gov if you have any difficulties. We are happy to have this opportunity to discuss the 2025 MSS with you. I would like to take this opportunity for Sylvia Vanderspeck to say a few words. Sylvia?
Sylvia, you're muted. We're not hearing you.
Sorry. Thank you. I thought I hit it. So first of all, thank you, Austin, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. It's very important that we receive the public's input on this mobile source strategy. Of course, this takes a large team to put together. So before we begin today, I want to thank today's team, which includes Austin Hicks, Ariel Fiddledye, David Kiros, Corey Palmer, Julie Schiffman, Mo Chen, and Jack Johnson. And so now I will pass it back to Austin to go ahead and start with today's webinar. Thank you, Austin.
Thanks, Sylvia. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide background information and inform the public about the development of the mobile source strategy, which you will also hear me refer to as the MSS throughout this presentation, and discuss the building blocks of scenario development, provide a summary of each mobile source emissions category, controls and opportunities, and finally solicit input and feedback on the discussion draft, public engagement process, and suggest any concept scenarios to be considered.
Austin, before you move on, I just want to mention that somebody has raised their hand, and we are, of course, going to take questions. We have a break in the middle and then one at the end. If you have a logistical question or if you're having an issue with seeing the slides or something like that, feel free to drop a question in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to respond real quickly. Otherwise, yeah, we'll take questions at our breaks and comments.
Thanks, Ariel. To accomplish this, we plan to cover background on the MSS, including the attention of the discussion draft, which was released on October 11th. Important considerations such as racial equity and environmental justice, public engagement and outreach, zero emission infrastructure, and explain what is and discuss the building blocks of a scenario. After this, we will be taking an interim break for questions, comments, and feedback through the Zoom application for those of you online today. We also will take questions via phone and will ask you to raise your hand on the phone using *9. Feel free to send us written questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A window in Zoom, and we will address them in the order as we conclude. Let's discuss the background on the MSS and why we're here today. The MSS is a conceptual planning document that identifies the pathways for mobile source reductions needed to meet CARB's various air quality, climate, and community risk reduction mandates. We use scenario planning tools to take an integrated approach to model the different levels of clean mobile sector technologies needed to meet our various mandates. Through this approach, the MSS can then identify new regulatory and programmatic concepts to achieve the fleet transformation needed for cleaner mobile sector technologies. The 2025 MSS will be the third iteration of this integrated planning effort that originated in 2016 with the first MSS. In 2019, Senate Bill 44, or SB 44, was passed and established several requirements for the MSS, included being updated every 5 years. The following graphic summarizes all of CARB's current air quality, climate, and community air protection mandates. Although there are no new climate out years since the 2020 MSS, the 2045 CARB neutrality target was made into law in 2022, along with specific target of 85% reduction in man-made greenhouse gas or GHG emissions. We also still have the 2030 climate target labeled in green as a scoping plan that we will continue to work towards, in addition to the deadlines for air quality standards for the state implementation plans, or SIPs, which are in the color yellow, and AB 617 communities at risk labeled in the color purple. Also, in recognition of the severity of air quality, climate, and community risk reduction challenges and the need for immediate action, Governor Newsom signed an executive order in 2020, which established the first-in-the-nation goals for 100% of in-state sales of new passenger cars and trucks to be zero emission by 2035, as well as 2035 and 2045 targets for the transition of medium and heavy-duty vehicles and off-road equipment fleets. While these mandates are diverse, they establish targets, and with the 2025 MSS, we will work to identify the pathway of clean mobile source technologies to achieve those targets. California has unique authority under Section 209 of the Federal Clean Air Act to set emission standards that are more stringent than the federal government due to our unique air quality challenges. CARB utilizes this authority to adopt the regulations needed to reduce emissions at the pace required to meet federal air quality standards. And these regulations are also critical to support reductions in GHGs and toxics. Over the last 50 years, CARB has submitted and obtained US EPA approval of more than 100 previous requests for waivers and authorizations of federal preemption. Currently, though, there are requests for 8 CARB regulations pending before EPA. It is critical to continue our air quality, climate, and community protection progress that EPA grant these requests for waiver and authorizations to unlock and continue CARB's ability to implement a technology-forcing mobile source emission control program that includes the most advanced emission standards and emission-related requirements for new motor vehicles and engines to date. Defining the scope of actions necessary to implement a strategic vision to meet all of California's environmental mandates require an integrated planning process. In order to identify the strategies and program concepts that will best help us meet all of CARB's goals, it is imperative to look at the mandates and potential benefits to all 3 broad and overlapping groups of pollutants that we're striving to reduce. Criteria: pollutants, toxics, and GHGs. While AB 32's climate change scoping plan looks comprehensively at all sectors to identify a path to achieve our climate change mandates, the MSS is developed to provide a more concentrated focus on mobile sources from which significant emission reductions are needed across all pollutants. This type of planning effort is essential to address the interplay between pollutants and sources and consider the benefits of different technologies and energy sources. Similar to the 2016 MSS, and the 2016 State Strategy for the State Implementation Plan, or State SIP Strategy, elements from the 2020 MSS were incorporated into the development of other planning efforts, including the 2022 State SIP Strategy, which translated concepts into concrete measures and commitments for specific levels of emission reductions. The 2020 MSS also provided complementary efforts to the 2022 Scoping Plan for achieving carbon neutrality and helped to inform community emission reduction plans required for communities selected as part of CARB's Community Air Protection Program. Each of these documents drew elements from the 2020 MSS to incorporate and build upon the actions and policies relevant to meet individual CARB program mandates. CARB plans for the 2025 MSS to build on the 2020 MSS and continue the multi-pollutant planning approach to illustrate the pathways forward for the various mobile sectors that are necessary in order to achieve California's numerous mandates over the next 20 years. While a scenario may outline the overall approach for a sector and include program concepts that will move the state in the needed direction, the specific strategies for each sector will continue to be refined as planning and public process for implementing specific actions moves forward. The collection of air quality, climate, and community risk reduction mandates will drive the development of our scenarios and concepts in the 2025 MSS. While the 2020 MSS did identify a pathway to achieve most of these goals and targets, including the furthest out years of 2037 for air quality standards and 2045 for carbon neutrality, the 2025 MSS offers the opportunity to build on the 2020 MSS, including updating the scenario modeling and potential future technology mixes from the 2020 MSS to reflect the programs CARB has since adopted or otherwise being implemented across California, and to consider what more is needed in various sectors. The 2025 MSS will reflect California's zero-emission vehicle goals and the requirements under SB 44. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we anticipate that this strategy will inform future policy development such as the Next State Implementation Plan, Climate Change Scoping Plan, and Community Emission Reduction Plans under AB 617. As I mentioned earlier, CARB released the discussion draft on October 11th and sets the foundation for the 2025 MSS effort by providing core information about the current status of various mobile source categories. This includes category descriptions with current and future emissions of oxides of nitrogen or NOx, directly emitted particulate matter or PM, and tailpipe carbon dioxide or CO2, summaries of current regulatory and non-regulatory control programs, and lists of available technologies and discussions of their emission reduction potential. The current and future emissions included in the discussion draft reflect the mobile strategies already adopted by the board. The discussion draft also provides an overview of the scenario modeling that will be included in later iterations of the 2025 MSS and introduces other key considerations in the development of the 2025 MSS, including environmental justice and racial equity, and meeting California's zero-emission infrastructure needs. Unlike the first draft of the 2020 MSS, this discussion draft does not include draft scenarios for public consideration. By establishing a foundational baseline of the inventories and building blocks in this first iteration, CARB is inviting the public and interested parties to help identify scenarios that CARB could consider to be evaluated as part of the 2025 MSS. It is in the scenarios and the future iterations of this MSS that staff will be evaluating and quantifying the potential emission reductions from potential future controls. CARB is committed to ensuring a healthy environment for all Californians, and we recognize that certain communities are disproportionately burdened by harmful air pollution. To that end, CARB is continuing efforts to advance racial equity and environmental justice across our policies, programs, and planning efforts. Throughout the 2025 MSS development, staff are working to have meaningful engagement with the public, including discussions about racial equity and environmental justice as it pertains to the development of concepts and scenarios. As a key piece of this, CARB plans to conduct analysis on concepts and scenarios to evaluate the effects on highly impacted communities. And finally, we plan to utilize our racial equity lens, which is a set of questions for staff to ask ourselves to help orient our thinking as we develop the 2025 strategy. This tool helps us operationalize racial equity across all that we do. We are working to conduct meaningful engagement with the public, stakeholders, and highly impacted communities throughout the development of the MSS. Prior to our formal kickoff of this process, we developed a fact sheet that has been published on our MSS webpage and shared with a number of organizations, including members who participate in the AB 617 community steering committees. In January, we hosted the kickoff webinar where we introduced the development of the 2025 MSS and a summary of initial thoughts on mobile source emissions and potential focuses. Additionally, we are participating in existing stakeholder meetings and sharing information and inviting input through CARB's environmental justice blog and other ongoing efforts. Staff also shared information at last year's and this year's US EPA Travel Conference. As we look forward, CARB staff want to continue to engage with all interested parties throughout the development. Through previous experiences and discussions, CARB staff has seen that some parties prefer utilizing existing forums or groups to discuss new topics such as the 2025 MSS, whereas others may prefer starting new reoccurring small groups or one-on-one meetings. In other planning processes, community members have conveyed that they would benefit from individual conversations, especially when framing programs or issues and barriers that communities face. This and all CARB planning efforts are not possible without the involvement and input from the public. And CARB staff developing the 2025 MSS strive to make themselves available for any meetings or conversations interested parties suggest could be useful to provide input. We hope that throughout this process, through individual engagement, the public releases and events, we have productive conversations and find meaningful ways to incorporate suggestions and feedback, leading to a cleaner future for mobile sources in California. If you have any thoughts or suggestions on how we can better engage with you, please let us know when we break for comments. Pivoting from the individual engagement process, we have major milestones planned over the next year as we develop the 2025 MSS. As I mentioned, we began the formal process with our kickoff webinar in January, and we are now currently at the red circle with the public release of the discussion draft in today's second webinar. When we are seeking where we are seeking feedback from participants, including input on the types of scenarios that will be analyzed. Staff is also inviting written feedback, input, and suggestions to be submitted via email through November 22nd. This feedback received from today and via any written comments provided during our formal comment period will support development of the second iteration, the draft 2025 MSS, planned to be released in spring of 2025. CARB staff will continue to engage with interested parties through all available means as we move forward. While the discussion draft establishes a baseline for future action, staff plans to include in the draft 2025 MSS a range of potential technology penetration scenarios needed to achieve our air quality, climate, and toxic mandates. After releasing the draft 2025 MSS in spring 2025, CARB staff plans to host a third public webinar to discuss and hear more feedback and suggestions. Staff will then work to incorporate feedback and refine and finalize the 2025 MSS into the proposed document, which we plan to release in the fall/winter of 2025, likely with the board hearing leading to board adoption by the end of 2025 and staff submittal of the final document to the legislature. Zero-emission charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure for mobile source vehicles and equipment are critical elements toward meeting California's air quality, GHG, and toxic mandates from mobile source emissions. CARB, along with other government entities, are making direct investments of billions of dollars in zero-emission charging and hydrogen infrastructure. Also, CARB continues to coordinate and collaborate with state agency partners and local government bodies to ensure that the zero-emission fueling and charging infrastructure planning, development, and investments are complementary to CARB's regulations requiring the deployment of zero-emission vehicles and equipment. Significant progress has been made over the last 5 years in the planning needed to coordinate widespread zero-emission infrastructure deployment across California, much of which has been led by our state agency partners at the California Energy Commission, or CEC, California Public Utilities Commission, or CPUC, the California Transportation Commission, or CTC, and the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans. California is taking a whole government approach in order to conquer our zero-emission charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure challenges. CARB and other agencies each have different authorities to adopt and enforce regulations directly impacting zero-emission infrastructure. There is market development mechanisms as summarized in the figure on the left. The zero-emission vehicle market development strategy led by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, which is structured to break down barriers and ensure collaboration throughout the California state government to achieve our zero-emission commitments. This strategy emphasizes the importance of the 4 pillars: vehicles, infrastructure, end users, and workforce. All four are fundamental to building the market, and the system thrives when all pillars are balanced. This zero-emission vehicle strategy focuses on the who, what, and how of building, maintaining, and balancing these four pillars, and uses the construct to identify key markets and implementation gaps. And to the right, you can see all of the California government agencies that are working on this market development strategy. Several of them have also signed on to a hydrogen market development strategy, and 8 of these are also working on a zero-emission vehicle infrastructure joint statement of intent. Of the government entities involved, the CEC efforts towards zero-emission infrastructure can be summarized into 3 categories: research and analysis, regulations, and investment. There are various publications CEC has released on zero-emission infrastructure, which cover what is in place today, the amount needed to meet our mandates, and the strategies to meet those mandates. CEC is also pursuing regulations affecting chargers such as reliability, inventory, utilization, payments, uptime record keeping and standards, and real-time availability and tire efficiency of replacement tires. The CPUC plans for grid infrastructure through 2 processes: the integrated resource planning and the distribution planning process. Additionally, the CPUC Transportation Electrification Proactive Planning will initially focus on zero-emission planning related to freight charging infrastructure and similar loads like light-duty charging plazas. The CTC is responsible for developing the Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment, which will support zero-emission infrastructure for freight applications by identifying the number of zero-emission charging and hydrogen fueling stations needed along key freight corridors. CARB and other state agencies recognize the challenges Californians will face for this multi-billion-dollar shift and have moved aggressively to accelerate infrastructure deployment in collaboration with each other and stakeholders. Let's now transition to the building blocks of the MSS scenarios. First off, I want to answer the question of what is a scenario. The MSS scenarios take a conceptual top-down approach and are driven by the level of emission reductions needed to meet our various air quality, climate, and community risk reduction mandates in future years. A scenario illustrates the technology mixes for each transportation subsector from the 2020 base year through the out year 2050 that could provide the emission reductions needed to meet our environmental mandates. Scenarios are used to bound the range of potential future technology deployments, depending on which regulatory and non-regulatory tools are used. We will touch on these tools in a few slides and explore the differences in the technology mixes and emission reductions between these possible futures. This means we look at what mix of cleaner technologies, like zero-emission vehicles, are needed to achieve the necessary pollutant emission reduction to meet our targets. These potential pathways facilitate investigations into which scenarios produce the optimal results and allow for staff to identify high-level programmatic concepts that could enable the state to achieve the technology trajectories identified in the scenarios. Note that since these scenarios are top-down, the levels of cleaner technologies may require more than current regulatory proposals. Emissions are gases and particulates released in the atmosphere from a wide variety of sources. In order to evaluate potential futures through scenario modeling, it is important to establish a baseline level of emissions currently being released and what is expected into the future under current conditions, including regulations already in place. CARB develops emission inventories for this purpose. Emissions inventories are estimations of the amount of pollutants discharged in the atmosphere that can be broken down by a specified source category into a certain geographical area and within a specific time span. The 2025 MSS Baseline Emissions Inventory will be an updated inventory from those used in other recent planning efforts and will include emission reductions from CARB regulations adopted through December 2023. Included in these baseline emissions are a number of regulations in recent years that were included as concepts in the 2020 MSS, such as the Clean Truck Check, Heavy Duty Omnibus, Advanced Clean Fleets, SOAR, ACC2, and the In-Use Off-Road Diesel. This slide shows pie charts with statewide emissions in 2020 base year of NOx to the left and PM in the middle, by sector including on-road in blue, off-road in teal, and primarily federally regulated mobile sources in dark blue. The pie chart to the right shows statewide emissions in the 2020 base year of GHG by sector, including passenger vehicles in blue, heavy-duty vehicles in light blue, aviation, rail, and ships or federal sources in teal, and off-road and unspecified in light teal. The sectors in the GHG pie chart are categorized consistent with and reflect data from the GHG emissions from the current California GHG emissions inventory. The pie chart shows mobile sources continue to contribute a majority of the NOx emissions, a significant precursor to ozone and PM, and are the largest portion of GHG emissions. In the 2025 MSS, we focus emissions profiles and controlled strategies on NOx, PM, and tailpipe CO2. It is important to note that although this GHG pie chart reflects all greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, nitrous oxide, and GHGs from refrigerants, in the 2025 MSS, we exclusively focus on tailpipe CO2 from mobile sources. This is what the bar charts in the discussion draft and summarized in the next portion of the presentation reflect. Due to the severity of California's air quality, climate, and community risk reduction challenges and the need for ongoing emission reductions, CARB has implemented the most advanced mobile source emission control program in the nation. CARB's existing control program has achieved substantial reductions across California and will continue to provide further emission reductions from ongoing implementation. These reductions have relied on a suite of regulatory and non-regulatory mechanisms that includes establishing emissions and performance standards for new vehicles and fuels, setting sales mandates and purchase requirements for advanced technologies, setting in-use and operational requirements for existing vehicle and equipment fleets, funding research and creating pilot programs to encourage development of new technologies, and implementing incentive and other programs to accelerate technology deployment. Together, these approaches are designed to achieve progressively cleaner emission levels for the entire mobile fleet. These tools represent the different types of programs and levers that CARB can consider for use within the scenario modeling for the 2025 MSS. The following figure further depicts the development of a scenario as the pulling of levers for each type of regulatory and non-regulatory tools available in CARB's toolbox, as I just mentioned in the previous slide. The figure conveys just one example of scenario development in the on-road heavy-duty sector and shows three different types of regulatory and non-regulatory mechanisms available to consider. In this example, the emission standards and manufacturer requirements available include the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation and the Heavy-Duty Omnibus Regulation. End user and in-use requirements include programs like CARB's Advanced Clean Fleets and our Clean Truck Check program. And on the incentive side, programs that could be considered and modeled include the Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Project and the Advanced Technology Demonstration Project. The levers or dials signify the intensity of each mechanism is used in the scenario, and a higher intensity could mean things including earlier implementation dates for standards, higher percentage of zero emission technologies being required for fleets, or more funding being dedicated for incentives. The lever intensity for each mechanism can be determined based on the vehicle technology availability, opportunities for controls, and public input. Creating different scenarios with varying levels of intensity allows an investigation and discussion with the public to produce the most optimal results. For a little more detail on the possible resulting scenarios, this slide will show an example of one of the scenarios that staff developed for the 2020 MSS. This scenario illustrates the evolving mix of cleaner heavy-duty trucks needed to meet California's environmental targets over the next 30 years. Each portion of this graph represents a different type of truck technology, starting with the pre-2010 model year, and shows how these older trucks, including these and the 2020 and the 2010 certified engines, would be phased out under the 2020 MSS scenario. The next portions here are the zero emissions trucks. which have started to penetrate the fleet and will continue to occupy a growing share of the fleet into the future, from both adopted regulations like the Advanced Clean Trucks program and through accelerated turnover through incentives and new regulations, including the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. Finally, there are cleaner combustion trucks certified to meet CARB's heavy-duty omnibus regulation or federally certified to a potential US EPA standard. Starting on the far left side of the graph, we see that the heavy-duty truck fleet in California consisted in 2020 of primarily of pre-2010 and 2010 certified internal combustion trucks with small numbers of zero emissions and advanced technology trucks. Moving to the far right of the slide, we see that according to the modeling at the time, the truck fleet needed to transition by 2050 to much cleaner technologies, primarily zero emissions, but with a limited number of clean combustion trucks in some locations. Across the top of the chart, we have listed the resulting percentage of clean combustion and zero emission vehicles on the road for the target years 2031, 2037, and 2045. This shows, for example, that by 2045, 77% of the trucks on the road will need to be zero emission, with 22% being cleaner combustion vehicles. With the population of heavy-duty vehicles represented, you can see in the solid green and the green and white striped sections that this aggressive scenario resulted in a total of about 830,000 heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles statewide in 2045, which is the 77% of the total on-road heavy-duty fleet. While this number of zero-emission vehicles seems ambitious, we're seeing more and more new models of zero-emission vehicles being introduced in the marketplace. At the time this was developed, there were only 16 commercially available models of heavy-duty Class 7 and 8 zero-emission trucks in North America. CalStart's zero-emission technology inventory tool now shows 30 models. Zero-emission technology is out there and rapidly evolving, which is why it's important to have a 5-year update to the MSS as required by SB 44 to see how these markets have changed and impact the trajectory of our scenarios. This slide translates the heavy-duty technology penetration scenario shown in the previous slide into NOx emission trends, with the business-as-usual emissions from the heavy-duty truck fleet represented by the dashed brown line, and anticipated emissions under a clean fleet transition are represented by the solid green line. The arrows show the anticipated emission benefits from this fleet turnover, with NOx emissions reductions increasing from 67% in 2031 to 94% by 2045. We are now going to take a short break to take a few comments and questions or suggestions to help facilitate this discussion. Here are a few questions to consider for engagement opportunities. What ongoing meetings that you participate in should CARB join to discuss the 2025 MSS? Or would you be interested in regularly scheduled meetings in a small group or one-on-one with CARB staff to discuss the 2025 MSS? You are not limited to these questions, but something you may consider in thinking about commenting pertaining to our engagement opportunities. For category and scenario questions, we are reserving comments for after we do a dive into those slides. As I mentioned earlier, there is a call-in line available if anyone has connection issues or would prefer to call in by phone. Spanish interpretation is not available by phone. We will be accepting questions and comments feedback through the Zoom application, both through the written Q&A function and verbally using the raised hand feature. We also will take questions via phone. We will ask you to raise your hand on the phone using the *9 and unmute yourself with *6. We want everyone to know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available online later. As such, please note that the questions you ask verbally or write to us will be part of this recording and part of the public record of this webinar going forward. All right, we will now open up the floor to your feedback and questions for about 10 minutes. We'll try to balance taking questions to the written Q&A and those with their raised hands. If we run out of time, we'll take your questions at the end of the presentation.
All right, so it looks like we have a couple of hands raised and just one question thus far written into the Q&A. So maybe we will start with the hands raised this time around. let's see, it looks like Mark Roast. You're the first hand raised. I have allowed you to talk, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Please do identify your name and your affiliation. And yeah, go ahead and make your comments or questions.
All right, Mark Roost, Sustainable Energy Inc., and I'm an advisor to the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition in Silicon Valley. And yes, I would be interested in participating in that in small group, ongoing discussions. Particularly, there's one major thing that I'm not hearing is conversions of the existing vehicles. And I realize that there's a little more technology development to be done in batteries and in solar charging. But we're hot on the heels of that ourselves. And so we're interested in helping develop scenarios that involve converting the existing fleet using advanced batteries, advanced solar energy, advanced structural systems to create canopies over both parking and driveways to augment rooftop solar sufficiently to actually power fleets. That's probably it for the moment.
All right, sounds good. Thank you for your comments. And yeah, we can follow up about future meetings.
Great.
The next person with their hand raised is Dory Chandler. You have, I think, been permission to speak, so you can go ahead, yeah, unmute and ask your questions or say your comments. Dory, it looks like you're unmuted, but we aren't hearing anything from you if you are speaking.
Whoops. Speaking.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay, awesome, wonderful. Thanks so much. Good afternoon. My name is Dory Chandler. I'm with the Coalition for Clean Air. We are very glad to see the draft 2025 Mobile Source Strategy include a comprehensive look at emissions across the sector. We are hoping in the next draft iteration to see the projected tons of emissions expected to be reduced correlated with associated specific measures that the board can adopt to help us achieve these reductions, as you're talking about and alluding to in the 2020 Mobile Source Strategy. It clearly outlines scenario assumptions along with the associated statewide NOx reductions per category, and this is really helpful in knowing what actions are needed. We'd also love to see the dates similarly to how the 2031 and 2037 goals were outlined in the 2020 strategy for when these measures could be adopted by, especially for the specific sectors, including aviation, older diesel trucks, modeling current drayage truck requirements, and cargo handling equipment. Additionally, the CARB efforts to pursue zero emissions ground operations regulations at airports, including aircraft plug-in at gate requirements, the ZE ground support equipment requirements, and the zero emissions taxing of aircrafts, we think is a great idea and would really address a huge source of pollution on a sector that foresees large growth in the coming decade. And one thing that we wanted to make sure was clearly addressed in this draft is that overall on-road measures do not address the steady increase of particulate matter. And we think VMT reduction measures should be incorporated here to address an increase in PM due to tire particles, especially, which electrification on its own will not address. And yeah, we look forward to seeing additional drafts and to continued participation both in this format and in small group discussions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dory, for your comments. Yeah, as Austin touched on in the presentation, we do intend, for the next draft or the next iteration, which will be the draft mobile source strategy, to include some draft scenarios that, will factor in, potential emission reductions from, different types of controls. So that's definitely the intent, and we appreciate your comments and your engagement. All right, the next hand we have raised is Will Barrett. Will, I have given you permission to speak, so go ahead and unmute and you can make your comments.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you for the presentation, and really did appreciate the opportunity to read through the document so far that was put out a week or so ago. And I can be brief, echoing a lot of the same comments that you heard from Coalition for Clean Air about some of the types of areas of focus we'd like to see, including, you know, the airports and the VMT elements that were raised. But also wanted to just suggest that, you know, within the presentation, Austin mentioned, you know, the varying technology penetration rates for different subsectors and how that can have an impact on how, you know, the parts come into the whole. We would also want to suggest that, you know, looking at heavier levels of useful life retirement, and again, pulling those levers on what happens if VMT continues to increase in California. What does that mean for the ongoing, as Dory mentioned, particle impacts of tire wear, that kind of thing, as well as what needs to pick up the slack if we continue to see VMT increasing as we're investing transportation funds into VMT-inducing programs. So with that, thank you very much. Look forward to ongoing conversations, and we'll circle back with other opportunities that might arise to check in with other types of groups and constituencies that we work with, and be happy to set that up with you offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. Yeah, thanks for your comments and your continued engagement. Yeah, we definitely hear those suggestions, and we'll continue to work with you all on those VMT related suggestions and stuff. And as, of course, we've mentioned, still have the latter half of the presentation to go. So I think we'll pivot to that just in a minute. Looks like we have 1 or 2 questions in the chat.
Hey, Eric, before
yes.
we go on, could I respond to Will's comment? So
Oh,
my name's
yeah,
David
go ahead.
Kuros. I'm the branch chief over the mobile source inventory group. And I just wanted to highlight for Will and anyone else that we had a workshop this morning on MVAC. It was the 3rd of 4 total workshops where we talked about a number of things, such as where we're going with new vehicle sales for light duty and some of the VMT trends over the next couple of decades. We also did make some updates on non-exhaust emissions for tires to account for increased tire wear associated with ZEVs. It is fully offset, and there's a net reduction of non-exhaust emissions due to the lower brake emissions from ZEVs versus combustion vehicles. But if you haven't seen the materials, they are available online, and we can have further discussions about what our baseline projection is going forward. Of course, in the scenario development, we could identify future projections where VMT goes up higher than we think it's going to go. So that's valuable feedback. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that we have another process for MFAC that might be of interest to some of you. So thank you.
All right, thanks, David. So yeah, we'll take, or there's just a couple questions in the chat. So we will, or the Q&A, we'll read through and address those real quickly, and then we will move back to the presentation and move forward with the rest of the presentation. So it looks like, yeah, there was a couple related questions input into the chat from Todd Campbell. One question, the first one said, can CalSTART provide the 30 models of medium and heavy duty trucks that meet zero emission standards? Or can you direct us to a link that discloses this information? And for further clarification, I'm asking what 30 models in the class 7 to 8 range that meet zero emission vehicle status and are currently available on the market. We would be interested to obtain this documentation. I think this does, of course, relate a little bit to some of the specifics we'll be talking about in some of the later slides. But yeah, if Mo would like to chime in here real quick, I think we'll have to send some links in the chat to respond directly. But Mo, if you want to also speak up real quick.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Tal. Yeah, we are certainly happy to dig up the link and find it too. Obviously, as you said, it's a report prepared by CalSTART, not by CARB, but yeah, we're happy to try our best to find out report and send a link maybe in the Q&A session as a reply to your answer.
Thanks, Mo. One other question that came in, again, kind of more related to some of the more detailed stuff we'll be talking about later, but one of the questions just more generally about the scenarios. Will the scenarios, and this is from an anonymous attendee, will the scenarios be based on actual data or projections? If actual data, what is the latest set of data that is available to input into the scenarios? This is a pretty complex question, I think, to answer. You know, there's a lot of different things that go into these scenarios. I don't know if David or or anybody on the MSAB team would like to kind of respond to this one. We are going to get into some more of the data stuff later, but go ahead, David.
This is David Kuros. I can respond to that at a high level. What we're showing today is a baseline projection, which is our best estimate of where emissions will be, reflecting currently adopted regulations with the best available data on the forecast for activity and fleet turnover. The further scenarios that we're going to develop later in the MSS process over the coming months to year can be taken in a number of other directions where VMT is reduced, for example, or VMT is increased so that we can see a lower or higher end projection of where emissions might be in the future so that we can assess whether we're going to be meeting our air quality goals and other standards. So I'll stop there. If there's any further questions now, I can expand on it more.
Yeah, I think that's probably good at a high level. Obviously, we were kind of giving an overview of what scenarios are, but I think, yeah, we can dive some more into that after we walk through some of the specifics of what we do have in the baselines and what those look like over the next few slides. All right, I think that mostly addresses the questions in the chat for now, or sorry, the Q&A for now. So Austin, back to you.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, David. All right. Next, Jack Johnson and Julie Schiffman are going to dive into the various on and off-road mobile source categories, such as emission control programs and available technology where potential emission reductions may exist for each sector. With that thought, please consider the following questions as we go through the presentation, and we will ask for your feedback at the end of the presentation. I will now hand it over to Jack. Jack.
Yep. Thanks, Austin. Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Johnson, and I'm an air resource engineer here in the Mobile Source Technology and Modeling section at CARB. And over the next few slides, I'm going to be discussing the current state of on-road vehicles, including their emissions projections, current control programs, and further opportunities for emissions reductions. And as Austin mentioned, but just to reiterate, the emissions shown here today are only for the on-road and tailpipe emissions, and that the projections only account for current CARB regulatory policies. Next slide. So first, I wanted to give a high-level overview of each category within on-road vehicles. The first of which is light-duty vehicles, which have a gross vehicle rating less than 8,500 pounds. In 2020, approximately 96% of light-duty vehicles ran on gasoline, 2% on electric, with the remainder including diesel, hydrogen, and natural gas. Next is motorcycles, which are defined here as having an engine size of 280 cubic centimeters or cc's or greater. And in 2020, approximately 99.5% of motorcycles in this category ran on gasoline, with the remainder including electric. Finally, medium and heavy duty vehicles, which have a gross vehicle weight rating defined here as greater than 8,500 pounds. And in 2020, the fuel mix here was 55% diesel, 44% gasoline, with the remainder including electric and natural gas. Next slide. And so to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about our projections for emissions for light-duty vehicles. As you can see here, we're largely expecting decreased emissions. So for NOx, a 96% reduction between 2020 and 2050, PM, a 26% reduction, and then CO2, a 91% reduction. And I'll point out that this is mostly due to increasingly stringent engine standards, as well as CARB policies like Advanced Clean Cars 2 or ACC 2. Next slide. For motorcycles, we are forecasting that there will be some reduction to NOx. However, PM and CO2 are expected to increase due to current limited control programs, but I'll get into that in the next few slides about how CARB is going to be trying to address some of these emissions into the future. Next slide. For medium duty and heavy duty vehicles, similar to light duty vehicles, we're expecting emissions reductions between now and 2050, with NOx reducing by 91%, PM reducing by 4%, and then CO2 reducing by 73%. And this is also due to some CARB-related regulations, such as advanced clean trucks and advanced clean fleet regulations. Next slide. So before moving on to the off-road categories, I wanted to give just a high-level overview of some of the current control programs related to on-road vehicles, as well as some emissions reductions potential for these on-road categories. So as I talked about a little bit already, ACC2 policy is largely targeting light-duty vehicles and is going to require 100% of new vehicle sales to be zero emission by 2035. Part of this regulation also updated the low emission vehicle criteria through 2035 model year, so those being the engine standards. ACT, or Advanced Clean Trucks, is going to require 100% of new sales to be zero emission by 2036. And then ACF, or Advanced Clean Fleets, is going to set additional zero emission vehicle targets for certain fleet categories, including government, drayage, as well as some private fleets. Additionally, the heavy-duty omnibus regulation established more stringent NOx standards starting in 2024. And then moving on to some of the emission reduction potential opportunities that we see for on-road vehicle categories moving forward. As we've talked about a little bit today, CARB is specifically tracking the efforts to reduce PM tire wear emissions like those shown in the EU Euro 7 standards. Additionally, there is the Advanced Technology Demonstration Program, which provides funding to accelerate next generation of vehicle equipment or emission control technology. Additionally, reducing vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, will be necessary to achieve climate and emission goals in California. Some possible solutions include establishing better public transit and building communities that are less vehicle dependent. And as I hinted to in the section for motorcycles, CARB is currently developing a regulation that will require zero emission motorcycle sales targets that would start in calendar year 2028 and gradually ramp up to 50% of zero emission motorcycle sales by 2035. And the proposed regulation is going to the board next month. Additionally, the motorcycle regulations are considering more stringent exhaust and emission standards for motorcycles that would potentially start in 2029 in order to harmonize with some of the Euro 5 standards. And they may also require onboard diagnostics for 30% of new motorcycle sales by 2029, with reaching 100% of sales by 2031. I also encourage everyone here to look at the discussion draft for this section of the mobile source strategy, which has a lot more details and a more comprehensive list of some of these control programs, as well as some of the emissions reduction potential strategies shown here. I would now like to hand it off to Julie Schiffman to discuss some of the off-road categories.
Thank you, Jack. My name is Julie Schiffman. I am the lead staff for CARB's off-road equipment inventories. CARB's off-road inventories are developed specifically for each category, and I will first walk through the through 11 slides, one for each of these off-road equipment categories, and they are as follows. Agriculture, cargo handling equipment, commercial hovercraft, construction and mining, oil drilling, airport ground support equipment and industrial, forestry, lawn and garden, large spark ignition forklifts, light commercial and recreational, portable equipment, recreational marine vessels, and transport refrigeration units. Each slide will provide facts such as the types of equipment within the category, fuel type, and equipment population. The emission figures provide statewide NOx, PM, and CO2 tailpipe emissions measured in tons per day for 2020, 2031, and 2050, highlighting the emissions reductions or growth between 2020 and 2050. For most of the off-road categories, emission standards are focused on NOx and PM, and they don't provide any CO2 emission standards. So we're going to start with agricultural equipment. So agricultural equipment includes tractors, harvesters, balers, and more, and there's a population of 170,000 pieces in the state. In calendar year 2020, fuel was 99% diesel and 1% gasoline. And as you can see in the figures, from 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are projected to be reduced by 82%, PM emissions reduced by 86%, and CO2 emissions reduced by 25%. And our next slide is cargo handling equipment. Cargo handling equipment represents equipment used at seaports and intermodal rail yards and includes equipment types such as yard trucks, container handling equipment, cranes, forklifts, and more, with a population of 5,600 and growing. In calendar year 2020, fuel was 89% diesel and 11% electric. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 77%, PM emissions reduced by 63%, and CO2 emissions increased by 93%. Our next slide represents commercial hovercraft. Commercial hovercraft consists of 3,300 commercial fishing, ferries, tugboats, and more, with a hailing port in California. The 2020 fuel mix is 99% diesel and 1% electric in 2020. And from 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 58%, PM emissions reduced by 91%, and CO2 emissions reduced by 2%. So moving on to construction and mining, oil drilling, airport ground support equipment, and industrial. These sectors represent 345,000 pieces of backhoes, loaders, diesel forklifts, paving equipment, oil rigs, aircraft tugs, and other types of off-road diesel equipment subject to the in-use off-road diesel fueled fleets regulation, known as the in-use regulation. The 2020 fuel mix here is 55% diesel, 36% gasoline, and 9% gas in 2020. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 53%, PM emissions are reduced by 59%, and CO2 emissions increase by 8%. The next slide is forestry equipment, which is 100% diesel and includes 2,300 pieces of tree fellers, cranes, delimbers, excavators, grinders, and similar. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 89%, PM emissions are reduced by 87%, and CO2 emissions increase by 58%. Large spark ignition forklifts also referred to as LSI forklifts, are forklifts used in indoor and outdoor industrial operations, including but not limited to manufacturing, wholesale, utilities, and retail. This category excludes rough terrain forklifts and diesel forklifts. There are 94,700 LSI forklifts with a fuel split of 92% propane and 8% gas in 2020. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 94%, PM emissions are reduced by 90%, and CO2 emissions are reduced by 90% as well. Lawn and garden equipment make up approximately 22 million lawnmowers, leaf blowers, chainsaws, trimmers, and riding mowers. They are powered by approximately 52% gasoline, 0.3% diesel, and 48% electric. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions are reduced by 65%, PM emissions reduced by 38%, and CO2 emissions reduced by 74%. Light commercial and recreational involves 11.9 million air compressors, gas compressors, generator sets, pressure washers, pumps, and welders, with a fuel split by 29% gasoline, 0.3% diesel, and 70% electric in 2020. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions increase by 20%, PM emissions are reduced by 53%, and CO2 emissions increase by 34%. Portable equipment includes generators, pumps, compressors, and similar, and this sector is 100% diesel in 2020 with a population of 34,000 pieces. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions decrease by 39%, PM emissions are reduced by 69%, and CO2 emissions increase by 81%. Recreational marine vessels have a population of 780,000 and include outboard, inboard, stern drive, personal watercraft, jet boat, and auxiliary sailboats. The fuel makeup is 98% gasoline and 2% either diesel or electric. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions decrease by 10%, PM emissions are reduced by 51%, and CO2 emissions increase by 54%. Transport refrigeration units, or TRUs, are refrigeration units installed on vehicles such as single-body trucks, trailers, shipping containers, and rail cars. TRUs also include generator sets that provide electricity to electrically driven refrigeration units, and this sector has a population of 200,000. Fuel is split between 96% diesel and 4% electric by 2030, and this is for single-body trucks. From 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions increase by 21%, PM emissions decrease by 82%, and CO2 emissions increase by 40%. On this next slide, I will briefly cover an overview of some of CARB's efforts in reducing emissions from off-road engines. And just like in on-road, there's a complete list of programs by category in the discussion draft. And so this broad overview includes control programs such as incentive programs. And the incentive programs are the Cara Moyer program, the Farmer program, and the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, which is known as CORE. Some regulations require reporting requirements, and some require limits on the use of older, dirty equipment. There's also some demonstration projects, which involve demonstrations of zero and near zero emission equipment. And on the right-hand side, there's a list of various emission reduction potentials, and that includes use of cleanest diesel. And so use of this cleanest diesel in cleaner combustion engines. There's also the option for renewable diesel, which is estimated to achieve 5% NOx and 30% PM emission reductions. There's also the future Tier 5 emission standards, which is additional reductions for newly purchased equipment when available. And then there's low and zero emission equipment, which includes hybrid and zero emission equipment, and that availability varies by sector. On the next slide, we are going to cover off-road, primarily federally and internationally regulated sources. And these include locomotives, ocean-going vessels, and aviation. So first, we're going to cover locomotives. Locomotives represent 5 separate categories to include Class 1 line haul, Class 1 switchers, short line freight, passenger rail, and industrial rail. And their population is as follows. There's 11,000 engines in the line haul locomotive category, 600 Class 1 switchers, 160 short line freight, 130 passenger, and 70 industrial locomotives. And in 2020, fuel use was 100% diesel, and it's moving towards 20% diesel and 80% electric by 2050. So these projections include that information from 2020 to 2050. NOx emissions are reduced by 85%, PM emissions decrease by 90%, and CO2 emissions decrease by 25%. So ocean-going vessels include container, cruise, refrigerated cargo, bulk cargo, tankers, and auto carriers known as ro-ro. These are all types of ocean-going vessels, and there are 1,470 unique vessels visiting California ports per year, with an estimated 7,800 vessel visits per year. So their fuel consists of 100% marine diesel oil. It's distillate grade 0.1% sulfur in 2020. And from 2020 to 2050, NOx emissions decreased by 39%, PM emissions increased by 82%, and CO2 emissions increased by 79%. So the current status of these off-road, primarily federally and internationally regulated sources include, on the left, locomotives have a control program. It's the CARB's in-use locomotive regulation, which increases the use of cleaner locomotives. Their moves to further emission reduction potential includes the increase in purchase and use of Tier 4 final locomotives, build zero emission infrastructure to support zero emission locomotives, and participate in demonstration projects. And then back on the left, ocean-going vessels have, under their control programs, there's established Tier 3 engine standards, at-berth emission control standards, and vessel speed reduction. And then on the right, for further emission reduction potential, that includes incentivizing more Tier 3 vessel visits, use of alternative fuels, operational changes, and supplemental zero emission options. And just like in the other categories, there's full in-depth information on all of these in our discussion draft that's posted online. And then I'm going to pass it back to Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So to wrap up here, we can finish up with discussing aviation related emissions. So just to talk a little bit about which categories and types of equipment we're looking at here. We have commercial aviation, as well as military, general aviation, agricultural crop dusting, and as well as rotorcraft or helicopters. Generally, the fuel used in this category is split up into 2 main categories. There's high octane leaded gasoline, also known as avgas. And then there are The second class, which is generally used for commercial aviation, is jet fuel or Jet A fuel. And to talk a little bit about the emissions projections shown here, as you can see, we're expecting emissions to increase for aviation from 2020 to 2050, with NOx growing by around 74%, PM growing by 12%, and CO2 growing by 61%. And the reason for this projected increase is largely due to many models suggesting that the demand for air travel will also increase into the future. And there are little to no emissions control programs specifically on aircraft emissions. And so to talk a little bit about some of the control programs that are adjacently related to aviation, as well as some future emissions reduction potential. CARB does currently have an airport shuttle bus regulation, which is requiring the 13 largest airports to move towards zero emission buses for passengers that are at the airports. Can you still hear me? Okay, sorry, my headphones died. So,
Yep. No, you're still good.
I'll just keep going until it switched over.
Yep.
So with that shuttle bus regulation, that starts in 2027 and then phasing through by 2035. Additionally, there are multiple sustainable aviation fuel or SAF related producer credits, including the US EPA's renewable fuel standard, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act 40B, and then CARB's low carbon fuel standard or LCFS, which all provide credits for the production of SAF. Additionally, as was discussed a little bit in the previous Q&A session, CARB is pursuing a zero emission ground operation regulation, which would include 3 requirements. The first being aircrafts to plug in at the gate, as well as zero emission ground support equipment requirement, and then finally zero emission taxiing of aircraft to tow the aircraft to and from the runway. Additionally, there are some opportunities for further emission reductions potential. One such idea would be to incentivize airlines to use commercially available aircraft that are known to have lower NOx emissions in non-attainment areas in California. This can be achieved through incentive or control-based programs. Additionally, we can continue to advocate to EPA as well as ICAO for stricter engine emissions standards. Additionally, there are numerous engine manufacturers who are developing hydrogen as well as electric aircraft. Many of these have the goal of becoming commercially available by 2030. And now I'll pass it back to Austin to.
Thanks, Jack. As I mentioned at the beginning of this section, we dove into the various on and off-road mobile source categories such as emissions, control programs, and available technology where potential emission reductions may exist for each category. Here are the questions we suggested to consider. We will now take this opportunity to see if you have any comments on these questions or others. As I mentioned earlier, there is a call-in line available if anyone has connection issues or prefer to call in by phone. Spanish interpretation is not available by phone. We will be accepting questions, comments, and feedback through the Zoom application, both through the written Q&A function and verbally using the raise hand feature. We also will take questions via phone and we'll ask you to raise your hand on the phone using *9 and unmute yourself with *6. We want everyone to know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available online later. As such, please note that the questions you ask verbally or write to us will be part of this recording and part of the public record of this webinar going forward. All right, we will now open the floor to your feedback and questions. We'll try to balance taking questions through the written Q&A and those with the raised hands.
Austin. Yeah, we have a few things that have been input into the chat that folks have said they'll respond to, and then a couple of hands raised as well. I think there's one person who has their hand raised and also put a few things into the chat. So we'll go ahead and start there with the hands raised, and then we'll answer some of the questions in the chat. So Mark Roost, excuse me, I think I'm saying that right now. You have your hand raised. I've allowed you to speak, so you can go ahead and unmute, and then, yeah, state your comments or questions.
Thank you very much. Mark Roost, Sustainable Energy Inc., and advisor to Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. I also have plans for elevated stacks of group rapid transit, then fast and slow bicycle lanes, then pedestrian and miscellaneous mobility devices, topped with a solar PV canopy powering the group rapid transit at modeled 50% plus conversion efficiency for the solar. This facility will attract significant percentages of people out of their cars, reducing vehicle miles traveled. We strongly support giving support for game-changing energy and transportation technologies which we are developing and which can support both new vehicles and converting or repowering the existing fleet. These technologies are promising to slash the financial, energy, and environmental costs of both sectors. Have you analyzed the life cycle cost savings to medium and heavy-duty vehicle owners if the cost of stationary batteries and solar charging infrastructure are slashed to achieve payback in 2 to 5 years? I can help with the analysis, and we could ask the Perryman Group of Waco, Texas, for detailed econometric input-output analyses, because that's what they do. Okay. It's almost certain that if you require zero emission for green or blue fuels, battery electric and solar PV charging technology will have far lower total life cycle cost and will be usable for customers. Our battery, and for aircraft, our battery ducted turbofan and solar PV technology will enable solar and battery powered aviation probably by 2030. The turbofan will use a substitute for neodymium that we've already developed to eliminate supply chain choke points for motor magnets.
All right, thanks so much, Mark. I think, yeah, you covered pretty much everything you put in the chat there, so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
I think Mo Chen was going to speak to some of your comments and questions.
Wonderful.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for your comment. Mo Chen here, the manager of the Mobile Source Technology Assessment and Modeling section. Appreciate your comments, and looks like you and your partners are doing a lot of exciting work here. Just for the purpose of mobile source strategy, if you can translate some of your great comments into kind of like a scenario, any like specific suggestion for a scenario, I think that would be really helpful for this work. For example, if you think this new technology can further accelerate the adoption of medium or heavy duty battery electric trucks beyond what we project in the baseline, and if you have any analysis you would like to share with us, I think we really appreciate it, and we can consider as one of our scenario for the on-road part. And to answer a question about the life cycle cost analysis, I'm pretty sure our regulation like advanced clean trucks, advanced clean fleet have already considered the life cycle cost or total cost of ownership for battery electric trucks. But I'm not sure if it applies to the specific scenario you pointed to, if the solar charging infrastructure or stationary batteries are it seems like are not what you described is not like a standardized format on the market right now. So if that's the case, I don't think that's including the regulation. However, echoing back to what I just said, if you are willing to provide such an analysis and as a scenario, we would be happy to consider that as a potential scenario in the mobile source strategy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mo. All right, so we have one other hand raised, so we'll take that real quick, and then we'll pivot to answer some of the other things that we have in the Q&A. So Jay Friedland, I have allowed you to talk. Please go ahead and unmute, and you can state your affiliation and make your comments.
Yes, my name is Jay Friedland, and I'm with Zero Motorcycles. First, I want to commend staff. This is a really tremendous amount of work that you guys are doing in terms of doing this modeling, and we've been following the mobile source strategy for a number of years. One of my questions, I guess, is in the 2020 mobile source strategy, the original goal on the motorcycle side was to get to 100% ZEM or zero emission motorcycles, so like ZEV, in the 2035 timeframe. I know that the current regulation is coming up next month, and staff has proposed 50%. They have actually also proposed they have two alternatives that might be worth considering in your modeling, just to look at how significant, particularly on the criteria pollutant side, motorcycle emissions are. One scenario I think is basically going to that 100% by 2035 versus 50%. The other one is no ZEM at all, just Euro 5 bikes. And I think that it'd be really helpful, as you guys look at the 2025 mobile source strategy, we anticipate that there may be changes in the future to the motorcycle regulation. It's probably going to pass the way it is because of pushback from the traditional ICE motorcycle industry. But I'd love any feedback at all on where the thinking was. Are you just trying to align with where the regulations are heading, or have you looked at those other scenarios, and would it be worthwhile? Because, obviously certain categories you're not going to get big reductions, but in this particular category, there's significant opportunity for reduction just because motorcycles are so much worse from a criteria pollutant standpoint, even now, disproportionately than cars or light duty, because of the lack of regulation for so many years. So any feedback on that would be great.
Thanks, Jay, for your comments. Yeah, we obviously right now are just putting forth in the mobile source strategy, our discussion draft that went out just has, the baseline emissions inventories. And of course, yeah, we're working towards considering what different things could be included in scenarios in the future. Of course, yeah, the regulatory process for the actual proposed regulation that's about to go to the board. That process, of course, takes into account a lot more information specific to the industry and everything else. That's a lot more detailed than what we might usually include in a scenario would have been included in this scenario in the 2020 mobile source strategy process. But that being said, I'll open it up to Mo or David or anybody on that your guys' team who wants to speak a little bit more to any of that.
Great, thanks, Ari. I think you covered it pretty well. I just want to point out, I think next month the motorcycle regulation is going to our board hearing. So I encourage you to hear more analysis or reasonings from the board hearing next month. I think you'll probably get more information from there. But yeah, we're definitely open to hear more suggestions on the potential scenario in the mobile source strategy.
Great, thank you much.
All right, so yeah, now we can, we're going to pivot here and go to written questions in the Q&A. So the first one, I think, that we have not answered is from an anonymous attendee. Will the scenarios assume 100% success for the full suite of the mobile source regulations, including ACT, ACF, ACC, Omnibus, ZE forklifts, at birth, locomotives, ETRU, off-road, etc., for each year in compliance period? The odds of each independently being 100% accurate seems low. There is a history of subsequent modifications to these rules after initial adoption. How will the 2025 MSS assign a probability of success for individual measures or in the aggregate? I think David Kuros was going to hop on and answer this question.
Thanks, Ariel. David Kuros, Branch Chief over Mobile Source Emissions Inventories. It depends on how you define 100% success. What I want to highlight is that our baseline inventory projections here will not be changing, but what they include is what our projections are for the compliance rates that we estimated for each of the sectors. So for most regulations that were recently taken to our board, we oftentimes include additional enforcement mechanisms to make sure compliance rates are as best as they can be. And we typically model a pathway to 100% compliance. However, for some sectors that may have not been regulated recently, or we just don't think 100% compliance is historically achieved, then there is a precedent for modeling good compliance, but not 100% compliance. Something I also want to emphasize is that, yes, our regulations are modified over time. Technology sometimes doesn't progress as fast as we thought it was going to, and more compliance exceptions or extensions are granted, and so we may need to make modifications to a rule. On the other hand, sometimes technology advances more quickly and amendments are made to get additional reductions. A lot of our board items are as part of the resolution, there's midterm reviews, and we typically go back to the board and give status updates on how things are going. So that said, what's in our baselines, which are not planning to be changed, is our best estimate of what our adopted regulations with the compliance rates that we've assumed will achieve. Where we're looking for input is what the scenarios should be. And what I'm hearing is that we should be considering scenarios that may be less stringent than the rules that are on the books or have been formally proposed. And so whereas we generally think of scenarios as how much more stringent can we go, what I'm hearing is there might be a need to look at what scenarios could be less stringent than the baseline. So if anyone has specific recommendations, like we just heard on the zero emission motorcycle item, then let us know so we can take those back and figure out what the most helpful scenarios are to model as we carry forward with the mobile source strategy process.
Yeah, feel free to speak more to that here, or you can send written, suggestions to us also via email, our MSS email address, which is just mss@arb.ca.gov. And then, or we can also set up, separate conversations about these things to, talk through more details. All right. So the next question we had in the Q&A is from David Reichmuth. The question was, are ROG or VOC emissions considered as a part of the 2025 MSS? Sylvia?
Thanks, Ariel. I'm Sylvia Vanderstick. I'm Chief of the Air Quality Planning Branch, and I can answer that question. And so while our current slides and our current document does not discuss ROG and VOC emissions, we are going to be seeing reductions in both of those emissions as we're moving forward. We're focusing on NOx emissions because what we've determined, across the state, that NOx emissions are really what is driving our non-attainment problem for both PM 2.5 and for ozone. But that being said, the strategies that we're going for are going to be reducing ROG and VOC emissions, and so there will be some co-benefits.
Thanks, Sylvia. Okay, next question in the chat is from Dory Chandler. Can you please explain the general increase in CO2 emissions across multiple sectors? Corey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think generally over the last 30 years, especially in the off-road space, there have been cleaner engines that reduce pollution, but those engines don't necessarily use any less fuel. And then over time, particularly in freight-related sectors, we're just seeing a continued increase historically. And we work with forecasting from the Department of Transportation and Caltrans that just shows there's going to be continued production and movement of freight in the state. So the categories are going to see more activity, and as they have more activity, they're going to be, burning more fuel. Even as the engines get cleaner, they'll still produce more CO2. So one of the key things we're going to be looking at in the scenarios, though, is the availability of electric equipment, especially in the off-road and freight spaces, and how that can be rolled out. You can see two of the categories where CO2 is dropping, and that's where our boards recently adopted zero emission measures, particularly lawn and garden and the LSI or propane forklifts. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Okay. Let's see, the next questions we have in the Q&A. One from Karen Elman. What is the anticipated timing for the zero emission truck measure? I can somewhat speak to that unless the MSAB team would prefer to hop on. Or Sylvia, did you want to?
Sure. just going to say that, the zero emission truck measures, at least according to our 2022 mobile source strategy, is supposed to be going to our board in 2028. And so I think that's the latest timing that we have on that.
And just to clarify, that's the 2022 state SIP strategy, in
Right,
which we
yeah.
included the timeline. You said the mobile source strategy, so
Oh,
just
I'm sorry.
clarifying. Yes, okay. Let's see. So other questions we have in the Q&A, one from Mars Wu in the Green Lining Organization. Thank you, staff, for this presentation. Is CARB considering implementing an environmental justice-centered definition of renewable hydrogen? Currently, over 95% of hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels, which runs counter to state climate goals. Without appropriate guardrails, hydrogen will exacerbate pollution, affordability concerns, and water access issues in priority communities. Thank you so much for these comments and expressing your concerns on this. I think this is something we will have to, follow up with other teams in CARB to investigate more into. A lot of the fuels programs are run out of our industrial strategies division. And so we can, definitely circle with them to follow up on this question and, have additional conversations with you if you're interested in following up. I don't know if, MSAB or anybody else would like to add anything. All right, so we'll plan to follow up on that one. Okay, the next question we have in the Q&A is from Maya Inigo Anderson. CBE is an environmental justice organization representing various grassroots community members, groups in Southern California and the Bay Area. I commend CARB for implementing the Clean Truck Check vehicle testing and enforcement program for high-emitting vehicles over 14,000 pounds. What percentage of heavy-duty, medium-duty vehicles are in that weight class, if you have that information at hand? And 2, is CARB considering options for expanding this program or other programs to specifically target emissions, specifically from the oldest diesel trucks and other especially polluting medium and heavy-duty vehicles? I wanted to turn to David, Mo, and team if you guys would like to answer those questions.
Hey, Ariel, I can start and provide some information and then defer to my colleagues if they have anything to add. So the Clean Truck Check program is the heavy-duty analog to the smog check program for light-duty vehicles. And my understanding is it applies to all or most vehicles over 14,000 pounds. And that's on the order of 1 million or so vehicles in the state of California. The exact number won't be exactly 1 million. The goal of that program is to ensure that the heavy-duty fleet, from an operator standpoint, is maintained and that there are no excess emissions associated with failure to repair vehicles that would be on the side of the operator. And so the highest emitting vehicles should be flagged in that program. The program took effect starting in 2023, and the highest emitting vehicles, as identified by what we call our peak systems at a few of the heavy-duty truck stops across the state, have flagged the highest emitting vehicles, and several hundred, if not thousands of vehicles have been identified and are now going through the enforcement process to ensure that the emissions control systems are working properly. There's additional requirements that are going to be taking effect that are in the category of what we call periodic testing, where the OBD systems are going to have to be scanned, even if the vehicles aren't identified as being high emitting at the random roadside locations. And so I think that might answer the question. If my colleagues have anything to add, please do. And if Maya, that did not answer your question, please feel free to elaborate further.
Maya actually also has her hand raised, so we can also turn to her. And let's see. Maya, I just allowed you to speak. You can go ahead and unmute your microphone. And if you don't mind, thanks for your affiliation as well, and say any other comments or questions you have.
Yeah, so Maya Inigo, again with Communities for Better Environment. So that did answer my question. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, well, that was the only other question, or sorry, the only other hand that was raised. Obviously, we can give folks a couple more minutes. If anybody does want to speak up, give us suggestions. Again, we are definitely looking for input, specific suggestions you have to specific scenarios we could run, or different levels of technology you would suggest be included in a scenario. That is something we can definitely take offline, have separate conversations about. Or again, taking feedback through our email, our MSS email as well. But if anybody has anything else they'd like to suggest or offer right now, yeah, please feel free to raise your hand, put anything into the Q&A. We'll give it a minute or two more. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Definitely for all your participation, questions, and comments. I'll turn it back to Austin, and he'll wrap us up.
Thanks, Ariel. We'd like to close with next steps. So as we mentioned earlier, the feedback received from today will support development of the second iteration, the draft 2025 MSS, planned to be released in the spring of 2025. After releasing the draft 2025 MSS in spring 2025, CARB staff plans to host a third public webinar to discuss and hear more feedback and suggestions. Staff will then work to incorporate feedback and refine and finalize the 2025 MSS into the proposed document, which we plan to release in the fall/winter of 2025, likely with a board hearing leading to board adoption by the end of 2025 and staff submittal of a final document to the legislature. The 2025 MSS will continue to be developed over the next year or so, and while that is occurring, CARB has other planning efforts that will overlap. Various AB 617 community emission reduction programs are ongoing in their development over the next year, and we expect the next AB 32 climate change scoping plan to initiate development as well. While the SIPs for the new PM standard will likely start their formal development process sometime in the middle of 2025. While these timelines do overlap, the 2025 MSS will inform development of the next round of air quality, climate, and community risk planning efforts at CARB. The next major milestone is the close of the public comment period on November 22nd for the discussion draft. So please let us know your thoughts on the discussion draft in today's webinar and any concept scenario suggestions you may have. We also encourage you to reach out to us so that we can meet and further discuss ideas and concepts, either existing meetings or new smaller one-on-one meetings. This will lead us to the next document iteration or the draft 2022 MSS, which will have concepts and scenarios. We have our webpage, as mentioned earlier, where we will release any new information or documents related to the 2025 MSS. We also have a direct MSS email and a new mobile source strategy listserv. If you have not already, we encourage you to sign up for that through CARB's listserv system to receive all notifications released for this planning effort. We'd like to thank you for your participation today, and we look forward to hearing and engaging with you over the next year as we develop the 2025 mobile source strategy. Thanks, everyone.